Mr. President, I've spoken several times in the past few weeks. Actually, I've spoken quite a few times in the past 20 years about the scourge of landmines. These are inherently indiscriminate weapons. They're triggered by the victim, and usually the victim is an innocent civilian who's either killed or horribly maimed. Now, the United States has not exported, produced, or used anti-personnel mines for more than 20 years. But notwithstanding that, even though 161 nations have joined the international treaty banning them, one nation stands out not having joined the treaty. That's the United States. And that is a shame on this country. As the world's only superpower with by far the most powerful military, one would have thought the United States would have set an example of moral leadership. Indeed, we're among those who are preventing having a universal treaty. And that is a shame on the United States. And this is doubly disappointing considering that it was President Clinton who 20 years ago called for the elimination of anti-personnel mines. 2 years later, in 1996, back in the last century, he said, quote, "Today I'm launching an international effort to ban anti-personnel landmines," close quote. But that administration did not sign the treaty. Then we had the Bush administration. They did nothing on the issue. They did not sign the treaty. Now we have the Obama administration. Nothing has changed. The Obama administration is following the Bush administration's policy of doing nothing on the treaty, so we're still waiting. I was thinking of this weekend because last week I was in Vietnam, along with Senator Shelby and Crapo, and Representatives Cooper from Tennessee and Welch from Vermont. We had conversations with President Sang, with the Minister of Defense, and other Vietnamese officials. But we also met with non-governmental organizations, many of them Americans, that work to locate and clear landmines and other unexploded ordnance. It is costly, it is dangerous work. They've been doing it for decades. Until you visit the sites where they do this, you can't fully understand. Because it is slow, hard, dangerous work. And at the current rate, when you consider that millions of landmines and bombs were dropped in Vietnam during the war, it's estimated it'll take another 100 years before it's safe to walk in that country without fear of triggering a deadly explosion. I've met countless people in Vietnam who've been crippled and disfigured by landmines. Many of them are children, the age of my grandchildren. And here is a photograph of two Vietnamese men I met with last week. You can see what landmines do. I know my wife Marcel and I, in meeting them, how touched we were talking with them. But they were thanking us, the Leahy War Victims Fund, the Vietnam veterans, and others who worked with them for getting them wheelchairs. I'm thinking, what if we hadn't had those landmines in the first place? They're lucky because they survived, but they lost their legs. They lost their arms. But they're not among the tens of thousands who died from landmines during that war, and so many who died long after the war ended. In Vietnam, we've used the Leahy War Victims Fund to provide medical care and rehabilitation to thousands of mine victims. And I want to compliment here on the floor, as a Democrat, I want to compliment a Republican president, George H.W. Bush, who worked with me and worked with an inspired leader of the Vietnam Veterans of America, Bobby Muller, to start in using the Leahy War Victims Fund in Vietnam. And we spend many millions of dollars to help get rid of the mines. As I said earlier, 40 years after the war, we still have huge areas of this country littered with mines and bombs. And Vietnam is only one of dozens of countries where people have been terrorized by landmines, some from our country, some from others. Now, when you talk to the Department of Defense about this, they say, well, their mines are smart because they're designed to deactivate after a certain time. Of course, that's better than mines that remain active for years. But if a child steps on one before the time they're deactivated, that child doesn't know whether this is a smart mine or a dumb mine. Because when they're active, they're no better distinguishing between a child and a soldier. It's like the young woman I met after the Bosnia conflict in a hospital, sent away by her parents to be safe during that conflict. And when the conflict was over and the armies had left, she's running down the road to greet her parents and had both legs blown off. The war was over. The war is just beginning for her. Now, I've never argued that mines have no military utility. Every weapon does. But so does poison gas. So do IEDs. But we wouldn't use them, and we consider it immoral if other people use them. They are the antithesis of a precision weapon. They don't belong in the arsenal of civilized countries, least of all in the United States. And the United States ought to have courage enough to sign the Landmine Treaty. You know, you have to wonder, Pennsylvania or Oklahoma or Utah or Georgia or Vermont or New Jersey or any of our 50 states were littered with landmines, killing and maiming innocent Americans. Would we tolerate that? Of course not. We wouldn't make excuses about needing to preserve these weapons. The outcry would be deafening, and the United States would finally join the treaty as it should have 15 years ago. Some might ask why this matters. You know, the United States has not used mine for 2 decades, even while we fought 2 long land wars. That is because the political price of using them, particularly in Afghanistan, where more innocent civilians have been killed or injured from landmines than perhaps anywhere else, would have been prohibitive. It matters because, like any other issue, even when the United States is not part of the problem, we have to be part of the solution. We speak to our moral core, we ought to set an example in this. We ought to be strong enough and brave enough and courageous enough to do what 161 other countries have done and join the treaty. I've spoken to President Obama about this. I know he shares my concern about the toll of innocent lives from landmines. As a senator, he co-sponsored my legislation. So did Secretary Hagel. Well, this is an unfinished job. It began with President Clinton, continued with President Bush, who did not sign it. You know, it's time to put the United States on a path to join the treaty. Only the commander-in-chief can do that. Only the president can show that kind of leadership. The world cries out to him to show that kind of moral leadership.